All right, let's just jump right into this. We are looking at a truly fascinating explainer today about a lifelong chess match between two brothers, a match that literally created the sports brands we all know today. Seriously, chances are you've got a pair of these sneakers sitting in your closet right now. But what you probably don't know is that you're wearing the end result of a story fueled by lies, secrets, and an absolutely insane sibling rivalry that changed the entire landscape of sports apparel. So the big question we're tackling is this. How does a bitter blood feud in a tiny German town give birth to two of the world's biggest sports empires? It's honestly kind of hard to believe that two of the most iconic, globally recognized companies share a history that is just drenched in sabotage. And the craziest part? It all traces back to one small town that was split right down the middle because of it. Okay, so our story actually kicks off back in the 1920s. Long before the massive global empires, there was just, well, a humble laundry shed. After the First World War, the German economy was completely decimated. The Dassler brothers, Adolf, who went by Adi, and Rudolf basically had to watch their mother's laundry business lose every single customer. So, desperate to help their family survive the crash, Adi decided to pivot. He took that empty laundry shed and transformed it into a makeshift shoe workshop. By 1924, they officially started their shoe factory. But you have to understand, these brothers were total opposites, night and day. Adi was this quiet innovator, a real introverted perfectionist who was completely obsessed with sports and just crafting the absolute perfect shoe. And then you had Rudy. Rudy was loud, extroverted, super charismatic, and focused 100% on pitching and sales. It was a pretty volatile mix, sure, but initially, it made for a surprisingly effective partnership. And they had to be resourceful because starting out, they had zero money, no materials, and the war had completely knocked out the town's electricity. So what did Adi do? He scavenged. He would actually wander old battlefields for days, cutting strips of leather from discarded military helmets just to make the shoe uppers. He even used strings from broken parachutes for the laces. And to make up for having no electricity, he built a leather trimmer powered by a bicycle wheel. He literally had a friend pedal the bike just to generate power. It was just pure, unfiltered innovation, and it somehow resulted in really durable spiked running shoes. Moving into the 1930s, things shifted dramatically for the business. In 1933, the Nazi regime took power and began heavily promoting sports and physical fitness for military readiness. This obviously created a massive, unprecedented demand for sports shoes, and both brothers actually joined the party as they grew their business. But their biggest breakthrough, and frankly a massive, dangerous risk at the time, came in 1936. During the Berlin Olympics, Adi went completely against the regime's propaganda and sought out the American athlete Jesse Owens. He gifted Owens his personalized running shoes. Owens agreed to wear them, famously won 4 gold medals, and boom, the Dassler brothers' shoes were instantly on the global map. But as war broke out in 1939, their factory was forced to shift to producing boots and weapons, which put a really deep strain on the brothers' relationship. Now, the absolute point of no return happened right in the middle of the war. The brothers, along with their wives and kids, were all living crammed together in the exact same house. And the tension was just unbearable. One night, during an Allied bombing raid, Adi and his wife rushed down to the basement bomb shelter. Seeing Rudy and his wife already sitting down there, Adi muttered, "The bastards are back again." Now, Adi later swore up and down he was talking about the Allied bombers flying overhead. But Rudy was deeply paranoid and absolutely convinced his brother was insulting him and his wife. When they walked out of that basement, that was it. They could barely stand the sight of each other. Things escalated pretty quickly after that. When the war ended during the denazification process, Rudy was arrested by the Americans and ended up spending a year in a prisoner of war camp. And here's the kicker. The Americans later revealed they had actually received a tip-off about him. Rudy went to his grave utterly convinced that Adi had orchestrated the whole thing just to get him out of the way and steal the company. Adi went through his own trial later, and Rudy actually eagerly testified against him. They were both eventually cleared, but the damage was done. They weren't brothers anymore. They were sworn enemies. Which brings us to 1948 and the ultimate corporate divorce. After months of really bitter negotiations, they split the whole shebang. The staff actually had to choose sides, the assets were divided up, and 2 rival empires were formed, literally right across the river from each other. Adi took his nickname, combined it with the first part of his last name, and created Adidas. Rudy originally tried the exact same formula with Ruda, before thankfully pivoting to the sleeker, more athletic name we know today, Puma. And you will not believe how petty this got. Because the two massive factories sat on opposite sides of the river, their hometown literally split right down the middle. It got so bad that the town became known as the town of bent necks. Why? Because citizens would constantly look down at your shoes first to see what brand you wore before deciding if they were even allowed to speak to you. They had separate schools for the employees' kids. It was strictly forbidden to date across company lines. Rival street gangs even formed based on whether you wore Adidas or Puma. The only neutral party in the entire town was the mayor, who actually wore one Adidas shoe and one Puma shoe to official events just to keep the peace. Naturally, this hometown drama eventually spilled right onto the world stage. Germany was heading to the 1954 World Cup. Rudi actually knew the German national team coach personally, but he stubbornly refused the coach's payment terms for wearing Puma boots. Well, seeing a golden opportunity, Adi just stepped right in and sponsored the team himself. And talk about luck. During the finals against a heavily favored Hungarian team, heavy rain started pouring down. The pitch turned into deep mud. But Adi had equipped the German players with an amazing new innovation, adjustable screw-in cleats. So while the Hungarian players were slipping and sliding all over the place, the Germans had perfect grip and pulled off a miraculous win. All because of Rudi's stubbornness, Adi became a national hero overnight. Of course, the retaliation was fierce. Just 2 years later at the Melbourne Olympics, a massive shipment of Puma shoes was mysteriously held up by customs and never made it through. But curiously enough, the Adidas shipment cleared without a single issue. Rumors started swirling aggressively that Adidas had actually bribed the customs officers to trap Puma's inventory, basically ensuring that the Olympic athletes had absolutely no choice but to wear those famous 3 stripes. Eventually, Adi and Rudi brought their sons, Horst and Armin, into the businesses to run things. But if you thought the next generation would cool things down, think again. The rivalry just escalated into massive cash-burning bidding wars over athletes. Finally, realizing they were practically bankrupting themselves, the cousins made a secret truce right before the 1970 World Cup. They agreed to what was called the Pelé Pact, a strict mutual agreement that neither Adidas nor Puma would sponsor Pelé, the greatest football player in the world. They did it just to save their bottom lines. But Puma ruthlessly broke that pact behind closed doors. In total secrecy, Puma's Armin Dassler offered Pelé an astonishing $125,000 to wear Puma boots for the tournament. And he didn't just give him the money. He orchestrated a highly specific, highly visible marketing plan to go right along with it. This led to the ultimate marketing betrayal right on the pitch. Literally seconds before the opening whistle of the World Cup quarterfinal, Pelé deliberately asked the referee to stop the match. He calmly knelt down and tied his shoelaces. For those few agonizing seconds, every single television camera in the stadium zoomed in tightly on Pelé's hands, beaming the Puma logo to millions and millions of screens worldwide. When the Adidas team watched this unfold on TV, they went into an absolute, totally justifiable rage. But as you might guess, this pure obsession with destroying each other came at a massive cost. Under the Sun's leadership in the 70s and 80s, the company spent all their energy outbidding each other, completely losing sight of product quality and what consumers actually wanted. By 1989, both of these legendary brands were teetering right on the edge of total bankruptcy. The families had literally run them into the ground, forcing both companies to be sold off to external private investors in 1993. That permanently ended the Dassler family's control. But from the ashes of all that family drama came an incredible modern resurgence. Adidas was taken over by a visionary Swiss billionaire named Robert Louis Dreyfus. He launched a brilliant turnaround strategy to make Adidas not just a serious athletic contender again, but culturally cool. They launched the innovative Predator boots and started signing global superstars who totally transcended sports, guys like David Beckham and Kobe Bryant. And as we know, later on, this strategy evolved into massive pop culture partnerships, like teaming up with Kanye West for the massively lucrative Yeezy brand. Meanwhile, over at Puma, they were saved by a young executive named Jochen Zeitz. He made a really crucial realization. Puma simply couldn't beat Adidas at their own massive scale. So he pivoted perfectly. He targeted high-speed, niche markets like Formula One. He signed the fastest man on earth, Usain Bolt. And he boldly positioned Puma as an edgy, rebellious fashion brand. By bringing on high-fashion designers like Alexander McQueen and even hiring Rihanna as a creative director, Puma managed to carve out its own billion-dollar identity without just trying to be an Adidas clone. Which brings us to a massive what-if to wrap things up. While Adidas and Puma were busy fighting this bitter, exhausting hometown war, totally consumed by their blood feud for decades, They completely missed what was happening across the ocean. While they were too busy looking at each other, an American startup named Nike sprinted right past both of them to claim the undisputed global crown in sports apparel. You really have to wonder, right? If Addy and Rudy had just managed to keep their partnership together, would they be the unbeatable kings of the sports world today? It really makes you think about the true cost of revenge.